Previously on Who Cares What I Think.
We have real Klingons, including a shape-shifting Vandorian posing as an Andorian. 2D animation is an easy, inexpensive way to bring back some of the really complex-looking aliens and environments we used to see in the old animated series. I fully expect to see a whole lot more references to the old animated series. Watch for them. The uniforms, the tech, the phasers, the L-cars, the starship interiors, the shuttlecraft, all era appropriate. Mariner is a badass who kicks ass, but she can crack a smile. She's caring. She has a sense of humor. It's nice to see a show in the year 2020 acknowledge that their main female heroine isn't perfect. She isn't invulnerable. She's a human being who is part of a team. Lower Decks is not Discovery.
And now, the conclusion.
One, please.
Good show. Who cares what I think? Moonjumper here. Welcome back to Who Cares What I Think, Episode 7, Part 3 of my, well, it began as my mid-season review of Star Trek Lower Decks, but it takes a while to edit this stuff in the few moments of free time I have here and there, and now here we are at the end of the season. So before I roll the tape concluding what I recorded weeks ago, I'm also going to update you on some more recent episodes, including, without spoiling too much, one of the best season finales we have had in Star Trek. I'm not exaggerating. It is right up there with Best of Both Worlds. Multiple examples in DS9. Folks, this wasn't even all that comical. This was a full-blown drama with consequences, which I'm not going to spoil. You need to watch it. While CBS was showing a rerun of Star Trek Discovery on its main broadcast network, I was watching Episode 8 of Lower Decks on CBS All Access, soon to be Paramount Plus. Man, that is going to mess up the symmetry of my Roku homepage. I'm very Adrian Monk-like. I have it arranged a certain way. You can arrange the tiles, the channels, however you want, parallel to my cable package according to, ABC, NBC, CBS, CW, lined up with my corresponding local channels, then cable channels, and very specific groupings, and suddenly we're tossing out CBS and throwing in Paramount. I already have a Paramount Network channel on my Roku, and now there won't be any CBS by name. I know it'll be carrying the same CBS programming, but I'm talking visual symmetry. I want my CBS app to look like CBS. Kind of like I want Star Trek to look like Star Trek, Mr. Alex Kurtzman. And lo and behold, Mike McMahon has done exactly that with Lower Decks. Even with an animated slapstick comedy cartoon, Mike McMahon has created a series which actually reveres and embraces the classic Star Trek canon, both visually and narratively, rather than attempting to distance itself from it, which is the polar opposite of what we got in Discovery. Lower Decks is firmly planted in a Star Trek universe we fully recognize, and with clear evidence that McMahon and his fellow creative staff have actually watched classic Star Trek, rather than just Googling a few summaries and Easter eggs off Memory Alpha. So here we are approaching the end of the season. I was watching episode 8 of Lower Decks titled Veritas. Enjoying the heck out of it as usual. It's a lot of fun, although this particular episode I felt was maybe a little heavy-handed with the references. In parts 1 and 2 of the mid-season review, I talked about how I was loving the references and Easter eggs scattered throughout, but unlike Discovery, which will beat you over the head with some little reference, they were so proud of themselves for looking up on Memory Alpha, no matter how out of context and completely anachronistic it may be to that time period pre-TOS. Lower Decks has been, for the most part, very skillful in the way they have subtly and organically dropped multiple references in a way that is fun and appropriate and not intrusive. I particularly love all the references to the old animated series from Filmation. In the 7th episode, we even get to meet a canonical Idosian for the first time in 47 years, same species as Lieutenant Eric's in the animated series from 1973-74.
By the way, anybody keeping a trace on the captain and Mr. Spock?
But episode 8, Veritas, while it is a cute and charming episode, for the first time since this series began, I felt the references in this particular episode took me out of the story a little too much, particularly with Boimler, a junior officer from the Lower Decks, randomly referencing events I have a hard time believing he would know about or even be privy to. Now, anything from TOS and TAS I think is pretty fair game. It's history. We saw a lot of that in the Vulcan Aerospace Museum, and that's fine. Not beating you over the head, it was just there, once again reaffirming that these TOS-era designs existed, rather than what Discovery has done, going out of its way to essentially decanonize the original series. That's exactly what they have tried to do, and Lower Decks is saying, no, flip you, Discovery. That TOS shuttle is legit. I loved the reference to Giant Spock, another great reference to the animated series, and that's fine because by the 24th century, the adventures of Kirk, Spock, and McCoy are supposed to be the stuff of legends. It's historical. It's like required reading at the Academy type stuff. So I can buy that, even though it's actually Mariner who's supposed to be the big Trek trivia nerd, so a little bit of contradiction there too. But then among other more recent events, he references Sub Rosa, Beverly Crusher having a way too intimate encounter with an alien ghost, and only a few years ago, a private, intimate encounter. Is that something that would be common knowledge on the Cerritos? Would Beverly Crusher go out of her way to publicize that? I don't know, maybe she cashed in and wrote a steamy tell-all book, #1 on the UFP bestseller list. Man, I don't think so. There is no way Boimler would know that. And yes, I am nitpicking. Who cares what I think? But it is what we Trekkies do. It's a sport. It's a sign we love you. Trust me, if there is ever a point at which Trekkies stop nitpicking, that's when you better worry. Like, oh my god, it's over. It's been a long road getting from there to here, and they don't even care anymore. Even after a decade of JJ, Discovery, and Old Man Picard, we are not there yet. And I think Lower Decks may even be bringing back some of our lost enthusiasm, particularly OG fans that are willing to give this series a shot and discover that Lower Decks is neither Discovery nor Picard. In parts 1 and 2 of my Lower Decks mid-season review, I talked mostly about what I love. Part 3 will feature my Lower Decks nitpicks. And even though what I'm about to play I recorded back on September 3rd after the 5th episode intended as a mid-season review, everything I'm talking about is still fresh and still applicable right now. Picking up where I left off, a fair review from an old school Trekkie of Star Trek Lower Decks. Roll the tape. Episodes 4 and 5 had a couple of bits I enjoyed. Back in my review of the trailer, this was before Lower Decks premiered, two things I mentioned. One, I didn't have a lot of hope that we would see the kind of high-concept science fiction and rich, intriguing environments that we saw in the old Filmation animated series of the early 70s. Well, Lower Decks Episode 4, Moist Vessel, actually gives us a taste of that. Even though it is a comedy, it has some intriguing, you might say, true Star Trek, Strange New Life, New Civilizations kind of stuff. So that's nice to see. That's actual classic Star Trek. But a nitpick of that same episode, I would say, is Mariner's attitude and behavior. Now, I've already said that I adore Beckett Mariner. I love the fact that she is not a Burnham knockoff. She is not a Mary Sue. But in this episode, she started to annoy me a bit in the way she interacted with her mom, who, spoiler alert, the big reveal of the pilot episode happens to be the captain of the Cerritos, Captain Freeman, is her mom. I get that she's a rebel. She's kind of an Ensign Rowe type. There's friction between her and her mom, and that happens between moms and daughters, fathers and sons. That's not unrealistic. Although when it comes to her mom, Mariner seems unreasonably petty and immature. Beckett Mariner, she's not a teenager. She's in her 30s, for God's sakes. She's at least 10 years older than Boimler, and yet when it comes to her mom, she acts like she's 16, and it's not a good character trait. She gets downright mean to her mom, and her mom basically tolerates it because her mom clearly loves her, but she doesn't know what to do to save her daughter from herself. Mariner is very self-destructive. Now, partway through the episode, they begin to bond, and it's clear that they do love each other, and it's very nice to see. But then Mariner blows it at the end when she deliberately goes out of her way to embarrass her mom in front of an admiral. And again, it's just mean and petty and uncalled for. It's one thing to argue with a parent in private, but to deliberately embarrass her mom in a professional setting, that bothered me. I lost some respect for Mariner at that point. And stop the tape. Update. In episode 9, Mariner's psychosis gets worse. To be clear, the penultimate episode, Crisis Point, is a delightful riff on the Star Trek movies, with reverent nods and musical cues from The Wrath of Khan, Search for Spock, and The Undiscovered Country, while going out of its way to brazenly lampoon the JJ films. But the creepy part comes in the way that Mariner creates a holodeck fantasy in which she seeks to take out her frustrations by attempting to murder a hollow image of her own mother, not to mention a rampaging bloodbath of her fellow crewmates, hollow versions thereof, in order to get to the hollow image of her own mother and try to kill her, after her actual mother went out of her way to protect her daughter from getting into serious legal trouble. As usual, her mom covered for her, and Mariner reciprocates with these psychotic murder fantasies. And it's not just me as a viewer who thinks it's weird. Tindy was just as creeped out as I was.
You're way too into this. This is messed up.
I couldn't agree more, Tindy.
I don't need therapy!
Yes. Yes, you do. But the key thing here is that the failings of their relationship will become dramatically poignant in the season finale. Okay, update over. Roll the tape. Secondly, I had mentioned I was a little disappointed that my favorite Starfleet uniform of all times, the black and gray uniforms introduced in First Contact and Deep Space Nine, were not going to be featured in Lower Decks, even though Lower Decks was set only a year after Nemesis, which was still featuring that black and gray uniform. That Lower Decks would feature a newly designed, brightly colored uniform, more similar to what we saw in TNG. However, I also said that I understood the reason from a creative standpoint, that the brighter colors might work better for animation, unless you're doing Batman the Animated Series, where everything is black and gray and it looks amazing. But for Lower Decks, brighter, cheerier, I get it. But I still love those black and gray uniforms, and I already miss them. But alas, Episode 5, Cupid's Errant Arrow, Beckett Mariner talks us through a flashback set at Deep Space Nine, where she and her crewmates are wearing the black and grays, reaffirming the continuity. Lower Decks did not retcon the black and gray uniforms out of existence. Are you listening, Discovery? Are you listening, Strange New Worlds? That alone made the whole episode awesome in my eyes. Stop the tape. Update. As it turns out, not only did Mike McMahon not retcon the previous uniforms out of existence a la Discovery, in the season finale we discover that the black and grays are still in use in 2380. In the season finale, a famous capital ship, I won't say which one, other than to say it's not the Enterprise and it's not Voyager, but a major capital ship makes a surprise guest appearance in the season finale, and the crew of that ship are wearing the black and grays, and I gotta say, just like Batman the Animated Series, the darker, more militaristic color palette, the dark uniforms look amazing in animation, making me feel a little sorry that we don't have them on the Cerritos. But from that, we could easily conjecture that Starfleet reserves the more militaristic black and gray uniforms for the more militaristic capital starships, while crews of support vessels such as the Cerritos, with its yellow stripe designation as an engineering support vessel, wear colored uniforms, designating them as a separate division of Starfleet. We saw this past precedent established in early DS9, where the crew of a starbase wore a more relaxed looking jumpsuit, while the crew of the Enterprise continued wearing the stuffier looking uniform. But then the DS9 style began to be phased in on the capital ships as well, but then didn't last very long as Starfleet then switched to the black and grays. Okay, update over, roll the tape. That said, there has been some nitpicking on Mariner and her crewmates discussing Data's brother lore as if those events from TNG had just taken place, which, if that were the case, that would be a continuity error. To be honest, that didn't even faze me. I did not interpret it as an event which had just occurred. It seemed to me they were simply talking about it, that's it. So I really don't see the issue there. For me, the bigger issue is honoring rather than openly disparaging the craftsmanship and artistry of past creators to the point that crafting a ship or even uniform that is recognizable as part of the same universe that has already been long established and is iconic, telegraphing that to do so is somehow beneath you, telegraphing not only contempt for iconic designs and designers, Matt Jeffries et al., but by extension telegraphing contempt for the fans of those iconic designs, however retro-futuristic they may be. Mike McMahon is taking a different approach. He's saying, no, I am not here to gaslight you. Your eyes did not deceive you. What you saw is what you saw, and I'm not going to insult you by retconning it. Visually, McMahon has done a particularly good job, and no, it is not shallow to want Star Trek to look like Star Trek. If it at least looks right, that's a darn good start. And then any other issues, such as writing or characterization, if there's a problem, it can be addressed if and where needed. That's what Trekkie nitpicking is for. What this segment of the review is all about. If you at least get the world building right, which McMahon has done beautifully in Lower Decks, then we can have a rational discussion about the direction of the story and the characters. That Beckett Mariner is a great character, except when it comes to interacting with her mom, in my personal opinion. However, keeping in mind that a character flaw does not equate to a bad character. Indeed, I believe the mistake of early TNG versus, say, Deep Space Nine was that TNG initially tried to sell us characters who had no flaws, which early on made for some pretty boring wooden characters. Now, as time went on, those characters became more humanized because they were allowed to be a little less perfect, a little more human. And then DS9 completely removed the shackles and gave us a cast of characters who to this day remain the most fleshed out of the entire franchise. So maybe it's not a bad thing that Mariner is badass heroic, dorky funny, deeply caring, and irrationally insensitive to her own mother all at the same time.
Yes, I'm very complicated, thank you.
Rewind back to the pilot episode. Captain sends Mr. Rules and Regs Boimler to spy on her daughter and report back what a screw-up she is, and he doesn't do that. He sees what's in Mariner's heart, that despite her rough edges and completely wacky and unprofessional personality, she's actually far more Starfleet at heart than practically anyone else on the ship, so he covers for Mariner. And Mariner, in turn, also recognizes that true Starfleet spirit in Boimler, and she stands up for him when her mom completely ignores the fact that it was Boimler who ended up saving the day, however inadvertently, but her mom completely ignores them both and praises her do-nothing senior staff, or at least that's the perception. As I mentioned, Ransom did come through by episode 3, and to be fair, the Doctor did deserve some credit for creating the antidote to an alien pathogen, but it was because of Boimler, while the rest of her senior staff didn't have a damn thing to do with it. It was our crew down in the lower decks who were the unsung heroes of the pilot episode, and that's kind of what the theme of the show is: shine a spotlight on the unsung heroes down in the bowels of the ship. Someone other than the bridge crew, in a way that even if the bridge crew characters don't get it, we, the audience, gets it. And I'll tell you, that's also kind of refreshing to see in a Star Trek series. And this goes all the way back to the original series. It's kind of a trope. You have a ship of hundreds, even thousands of officers and crewmen, but you get the sense that there's no reason for anybody but the bridge bridge crew to even be there? Why do they even need a crew? The captain leads all the away teams, puts himself or herself in the most dangerous situations, which would never happen in reality. The captain's place is on the bridge, coordinating what the crew is doing out in the field. If he needs to send in the Makos, he sends in the Makos. He doesn't lead them into battle. Except this is Star Trek, where every captain, male or female, is a Mary Sue. The captain and first officer beaming into the heart of the Klingon war machine by themselves, and not even a red shirt to be used as cannon fodder. That's literally what got Captain Giorgio killed. So it actually is refreshing to see a Star Trek series which honors the canon, but also gives us a little wink wink nudge nudge when it comes to some of Trek's sillier tropes, and proves that there actually is a crew somewhere down below the bridge. I like the theme of acknowledging Starfleet's working class, but the one thing that really bothered me, the opening title sequence appears to show the Cerritos turning tail and running from battle. Like, hey folks, this crew is a bunch of cowards. No, I don't mind them having their butts handed to them. Maybe they're not the Enterprise crew, they're Starfleet's misfits. That's fine. Let them be shown taking a single hit and spinning out of control like idiots. That's fine. Let them be shown being kept out of the battle as the big prestige ships move in and hog all the glory. Fair enough, but I do not like them being portrayed as cowards. That really bothered me. That pissed me off. And I guarantee you that is going to piss off a lot of fans who might have otherwise been open to giving the show a chance. And stop the tape. Here's a good place to add a little update to everything you were just hearing, which I recorded weeks ago. The guys over at Trek Yards have been interviewing Mike McMahon. Check it out if you haven't already. But an important thing that he mentioned does put this into better context. Just visually speaking, and I talked about this in my review of the trailer, I was under the impression that the Cerritos, the California class, was more or less a kit bash of a Galaxy-class saucer. That's kind of what it looks like. But if you just look at it and you don't have anything to compare it to, it looks pretty big and impressive. Well, I was wrong. It's not. It's not a galaxy saucer. Apparently, it's small. It's closer in size to say not much bigger than the NX-01, which in itself isn't tiny, but compared to a Galaxy class or Sovereign class, it's small. Now, not that size is everything. Look at DS9's Defiant. I mean, it's a gun with an engine. But the Cerritos couldn't go 2 rounds with the Defiant. It's not designed for combat. It's specifically a support vessel. I mean, it's practically a tugboat. It's got some defensive capabilities, but it is not designed to go into combat. So that does add some context to them not engaging the Borg. However, without that Trek Yards interview, we don't know that. It's not on screen for the people who haven't seen that interview. All we see is them warping away, and it's not a good look. If they're a support vessel, show them being a support vessel. Otherwise, what are we supposed to think? They're just running away. And if they are just a support vessel, then why are members of the Cerritos crew being sent on a covert mission to infiltrate the Romulan Star Empire in Episode 8, Veritas? Is it a rogue mission? Is that why they circumvent Starfleet security and steal a bird of prey from Vulcan? What's going on? Inquiring minds want to know. I don't know. Seems like to me they're more than capable of handling themselves in dangerous situations. So I would get rid of the tuck tail and run scene. It's actually out of character because in the actual show, the Cerritos crew is rather competent and pretty brave. That's a compliment, by the way. My other criticisms are a little more nitpicky. Tendi and Rutherford are both very likable characters. All 4 of the main characters are likable, but Rutherford is kind of curious. He has a cyborg implant which is directly wired into his brain, including his emotional centers, and it gives him a very Borg-like appearance. It's Vulcan technology according to the pilot episode. I mean, my takeaway was that Rutherford apparently volunteered for this, that this was an elective surgery. It wasn't because he was injured, or at least, like I said, that was my takeaway. Maybe we'll find out that he was injured, I don't know. Otherwise, it's a bit curious to see a human voluntarily receive a Borg-like implant in an era that the Federation would not likely be so pro-Borg. That's not a criticism so much as a curiosity, so I'd like to know more about that. Another curiosity is to see all crewmen armed with phasers even while off duty and able to engage in a firefight at the drop of a hat. Now, I'm not opposing that. I am a Second Amendment guy who believes in one's right to defend themselves. It's just that in the past, Starfleet crews have typically only been universally armed when they knew the ship was going to be under threat, and they break out the phasers for everybody. Here in the pilot episode, they were literally sitting in a bar when a zombie apocalypse breaks out and they all whip out phasers. So one wonders if that policy might have changed given how many threats they have faced in recent years, ranging from the Borg to the Dominion. You never know when hostiles might beam in, and you have to be prepared for anything. So that's not necessarily a bad policy, it's just not something we've seen before. And nitpicking update, this very question turns into a little inconsistency in the season finale, which I'll say again is an A+ season finale, but that doesn't mean I can't have some fun nitpicking. The ship is boarded, and at this point it's not a comedy. It is deadly serious. People are dying, and they end up having to fight hand-to-hand combat with a cache of contraband weapons that Mariner had stashed. But where are the phasers? Up to now, every crew member in every episode has seemingly been carrying a sidearm at all times, albeit oddly hidden until they whip it out. It's kind of like Amanda on Highlander. She can literally be wearing a miniskirt and pull a sword out of nowhere. Suddenly, they don't have phasers, and nobody even opens a weapons locker? Now, the scene is amazing, but where are the phasers? Okay, nitpick over, roll the tape. One thing I've seen other people criticize is Mariner rolling up her sleeves being out of uniform code. Well, Chief O'Brien rolls up his sleeves. That was practically his trademark, and we've seen captains loosen their collars, and then in episode 3 it's actually addressed. She actually gets in trouble for it, so that's not a reason to reject the show or the character either. And one final update before I wrap up my third and final segment of my deep dive analysis into Star Trek Lower Decks. Be sure to go back and watch parts 1 and 2 if you haven't already. In the absolutely superb season finale, the episode opens on Beta 3. That is the same planet visited by the original series Enterprise in Return of the Archons, where they discover a 19th century society ruled by an ancient computer AI named Landru. Kirk talked the computer into self-destructing, liberating the Baden people, but only temporarily it seems, because when Starfleet sends the Cerritos back to Beta 3 after 113 years, they discover that the Landru AI has reinserted himself as their ruler. This was an awesome, unexpected callback. They show the Landru mainframe looking exactly the same as he did in TOS, as does the 1800s city and clothing. I guess the idea is that Landru wants to keep everything stagnant, just as he had done in TOS, and that was kind of the whole point. But, it might have been a nice touch to evolve the situation just a bit. It's 113 years later, it's the 2380s. What if Landru, in a bid to seem a little less dictatorial, had allowed the society to progress technologically and stylistically under his control, of course? It would be a strict technocracy with his Orwellian eyes everywhere, but 113 years later, instead of the 1860s, it's now the 1980s. Everything's techno 80s, parachute pants, big hair. I'd say do Landru as Max Headroom, but then they already did that gag on Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. But hey, 1984, Landru is watching. You could do a Tron gag or any number of possibilities. You could make a whole episode out of that rather than just a teaser, but regardless, it was great revisiting this planet. The love and reverence that Mike McMahon and his staff clearly have for classic Star Trek, both TOS and TNG eras, is such a breath of fresh air compared to what has sometimes seemed like outright disdain coming from members of the Kurtzman camp over the last few years. Now, whether or not Lower Decks is a sign that Alex Alex Kurtzman is listening, or CBS is listening, or both. Somebody up top is listening, just allowing this to happen, and it's about time. Mike McMahon is trying to course correct some of the grave errors of Kurtzman Trek, and for that he deserves some credit and some support. Otherwise, if you refuse to watch this because, it's a cartoon or whatever, then CBS can only assume that you want more Discovery-style Kurtzman Trek and not a series that actually adheres to classic canon. But who cares what I think? From deep in the heart of Texas, may the great bird of the galaxy bless your many journeys. Be sure to like, share, subscribe, and smash that notification bell. And check out some of my previous videos so that I'm not just talking to myself, which I do a little too much of. See y'all next time.